Mysterious Manic Manwa. It all started centuries ago, when the heavens were divided into parts. As a result, dungeons were created from which monsters escaped in an endless stream. They were all different in appearance and size, and the worst thing was that they could not be destroyed by conventional weapons. The only ones who could defeat them were people whose supernatural powers were awakened when the dungeons appeared. They were called the Awakened Ones. As a result of their efforts, the plagued world gained harmony. From the onset monsters and magic appeared, a new civilization emerged. Some of the awakened became hunters who had to fight monsters. However, decades later, there were too many of them because the secret of the awakening mechanism was discovered and anyone with money could become superpowered. Anyone who didn't have a drop of self-confidence became a cool awakened person who had no problem with it. It is clear that the number of people willing to become elected was growing. Everything around was buzzing about success in this area. This was the beginning of the era of monster fighters. There were so many of them that when the portal was opened, a whole crowd of people gathered to get there. After unsuccessful attempts to solve this problem, the authorities introduced a mandatory exam to obtain the honorary title of Monster Hunter. Of course, this resulted in the emergence of specialized educational institutions that helped prepare physically and informationally for the exam. Later, private institutions that taught everything a future hunter needed were called hunting academies. And now, being on the battlefield with severe wounds, the monster did not understand how the man standing in front of him could be so strong. He was only mocked by the young man, who said that his opponent simply had too narrow a horizon. The boy's words made the creature very angry, and refusing to accept this fact, it decided to attack him with its giant tail as a punishment. Without sparing any effort, the monster struck the hunter where he was standing, but he jumped up and dodged the blow. Anger seized the terrible creature, and it tried to grab the enemy with its big clawed paws. However, the attempt was unsuccessful and the guy, thanks to his tiny size compared to his opponent, was able to approach him from behind. He managed to deal a crushing blow to the monster and landed back on the ground with no difficulty. However, despite the seemingly impressive attack, the guest from another universe did not give up, but rather began to form a destructive sphere to win a fierce battle. A purple jet of unearthly power was released from its mouth towards the opponent in the hope of surviving and emerging victorious. This attempt did not seem to scare the boy at all. On the contrary, he stood there and watched the monster's ridiculous actions with a smile. All his thoughts were occupied with thoughts about the teachers from the academy, their instructions and teachings. In addition, this educational institution was unusual because it was located in another dimension. Therefore, he had no difficulty delivering the final blow to the monster. After that, the guy left the battlefield as a winner. After finishing all his business, the young man took out his phone, which he had been carrying throughout the fight. This heroic fighter's name was Kim Sojin, who was the ripe age of 27 years old. He had naturally awakened at birth. He was given the opportunity to be stronger than others. However, he lost his parents in an accident and has been transporting defeated monsters to pay off his debts for 9 years. Despite his difficult fate, the boy dreams of becoming a professional monster hunter. His colleagues support him in this. They ask about his progress and are outraged by the law on compulsory exams and attendance at the academy. The guy agrees with them and notes that most of the teachers and educational institutions for hunters still fight monsters themselves. In addition, they share their experience and teach them tricks, which is why there is a record number of applications to the academy. Because of this, there is an overwhelming difference between the knowledge of those who graduated from the academy and the uneducated awakened ones. The time came when training to become a hunter became compulsory, so working hard, Sojin finally managed to raise the money to pay for a year of training at the academy. Of course, he would like to enter the best institutions, but they are too expensive, so he chose the best option. For himself, suddenly, he receives a spam advertisement about the Transcendent Academy with a link to a video attached. A part of the video is taken up by a student who gives an interview about how happy he is to study at this institution and considers it the best decision in his life. After that, an elderly man appears and thanks the academy for passing the advanced training exam and positive feedback from other students. After all the praise, the video ends, and the guy who watched the ad is shocked. He wonders what kind of crazy person could have created the video he just saw. In addition to the fact that the academy's website is no different from others, the names of the teachers are strange. When he comes across a professor called the Strange Sage, he decides to check it out and sees a monkey. The teacher says that his real name is Sun Wukun and the weapon he uses is a joystick, which is not very different from other sticks and spears. Surprisingly, what he sees in the video looks normal considering his concept. Since it may be difficult for someone to understand the theoretical explanation, the master decides to show a deflecting movement and calls it scattering in a simple way. He turned the stick back inside, grabbed it with both hands and took a fighting stance until the final move was made. As a result, Sojin tries to understand where the mountain that was previously in the video has gone and how it could have disappeared. At first, he thinks it's artificial intelligence because he realizes that even an elite hunter can't do that. After a short hesitation, the guy decides to confirm his participation in the Strange Sages masterclass, but first he needs to register a new account. To register a membership, the young man has to pay all the money he has saved for a year of study at the academy, namely $40,000. At first the guy can't understand how much money was demanded from him, but then he sees the amount and concludes that this academy is a charlatan. When I met another colleague at work, he asked me if he was going to enter the academy. When he received a positive answer, he realized why the boy was in such a high spirits and began to ask him what kind of institution Sojun had chosen. The guy told us that the academy was called the Park while a crane was transporting a monster that had recently been defeated in a battle. The men continued to say that his colleague deal with monsters that the young man would catch and the older one would even play soccer with a dragon skull. After the conversation, Sojin continues to work, carrying the monsters on his back to the place of their disposal. However, suddenly a huge buffalo-like monster comes tumbling down from the crane right over his head. The guy woke up in the hospital with a band-aid on his cheek and his face did not express any emotions. Everything happened quickly. The doctor says that the injured bones of the leg healed and became nerve-enveloped due to rapid regeneration. The employer shouts that he is not going to pay compensation, because what will happen to his reputation if the world finds out about what happened? Information that the operation, which should be done immediately before the nerves finally fused with the bones, would cost $40,000 and the $3,000 left by Uncle Manchel, which he gave from himself, is also having financial problems. That being all the remaining funds for the guy sitting by himself on a hospital bed with a splint on his leg. The money he'd been saving for a long time was used to pay for the operation. Thoughts regarding whether he could go through the same thing again were totally interrupted by the ping of a message that arrived on his phone. The Transcendental Academy suddenly announced the past is insignificant and new students will receive a free pass if they register at once. Initially, the young man did not believe this is the same academy in which he saw those videos recently, on account of the fact his search for the academy was rendered useless. In addition, they say the amount for registration is individual and this time is only $3,000. Although last time, it was $40,000. Thoughts began to creep into his head that this academy was trying to seize the last money he had, just like when he initially learned of it. Nonetheless, after further consideration, Sojin decided why not register. After all, he was currently in hospital with a splint being drained, why not be scammed too? There was nothing much on the account anyways. After paying, as soon as membership was confirmed, the money from the envelope lying next to the guy suddenly took off and disappeared, which frightened him momentarily. He received a notification on his mobile congratulating him on entering the Transcendental Academy, and a small humanoid creature popped up appearing right beside the patient. He pops up right out of the guy's phone and says hello, checking to make sure he is talking to the guy called Kim Sojin. The young man even thinks for a second that has hit his head, while the creature introduces himself as a mentor with the responsibility of seeing Sojin through initial training. Meanwhile, dazed Sojin is barely recovering. The little pixie with pink eyes and hair decides to introduce himself once more, saying his name is Mentor. The pixie creature stands proudly on the student's phone and looks up at him due to his minute size. Whilst distrust lingers on Sojin's side, Sojin stares at his new acquaintance without looking away. He mentally goes over the words spoken by the creature before him. Namely, his name is Mentor, therefore he is here to teach something to Sojin. The creature must have really enjoyed repeating the same thing while the poor guy was trying to comprehend everything mentally. Abruptly, Sojin is reminded of a mythological fictional story he once heard whereby a teacher called Mentor was in. As it turns out, his guess was correct. The unexpected guest starts divulging that his character reflects that very sensei of that mythological hero lead. That particular hero was the type of student that took a very long time for him to become transcendent, and that their academy trains those who strive to push past their limits and exceed their capabilities. Now the boy starts to realize as it dawns on him, this is not an institution that teaches you to be hunters, but instead where the ordinary become transcendent. Mentor then began to assure him it's even better since they are on a completely different level. Nonetheless, this does not actually assure Sojin at all since he has always dreamed of becoming an elite hunter, so the pixie asks him to take a test. This aided in understanding the nature of transcendent a student wants to become in the future and what specialization he or she can be classified into. When questioned which area Sojin wants to transcend into, he selected combat. This was a shock to no one, of course, since his long-held dream was to become a hunter. He easily starts answering the test questions. However, on the second one, the guy stops and the mentor gladly flies over to help the student with his difficulties. Therefore, the teacher begins to list different options that could describe the abilities of his student. However, after receiving negative responses to all the proposals, the mentor is disappointed because the guy can't do anything. How he managed to enroll in the Transcendent Academy remains a mystery to both the creature and Sojin himself. The kid decides to support the student, saying that there is nothing to worry about because no one has ever been felt from the institution. Clapping his hands, the guest begins to cheer the dork and directs him to continue answering questions. The guy feels exhausted after finishing the survey, which consisted of 108 tests. Since Seokjin has a free pass, the mentor decides to recommend him a few mandatory lectures before they analyze his profile. In one of the tests, the guy chose that he prefers the method of fighting with a spear, so it would be better for him to choose the Oriental Key technique. A notification about the planned events appears on the phone, with a brief description of the masterclass and the name of the instructor who will conduct it. According to his mentor, in addition to physical problems, the guy has psychological ones. Such words could not but confuse me. Therefore, it was decided to start with lecture by instructor Bronze Guy. The name of the teacher seems familiar to him because that is the name of the bronze guy according to mentor. Although the instructor himself denies this fact, all students address him in this way. In addition, at the end of the lesson, everyone who takes the course receives an unshakable heart. This is the reason why bronzy lectures are considered mandatory. Based on Sojung by telling him that even if he thinks he's going crazy, it is imperative that he watches the video to the end. After these words, the mentor says goodbye and promises to contact the student after analyzing his profile, leaving him shocked. Pulling himself together, the guy decides that there is nowhere to go and that he will have to take a course with Bronze Guy. In the video, a large statuesque man with bronze skin and short curly hair appears in front of the young man's eyes, striking a folded pose. It was hard to believe that it was really the bronze guy, but due to the fact that he looks exactly like a statue, all doubts disappear. Meanwhile, the instructor continues to give examples of his wisdom. That he has a great reputation. The boy realizes that the lecture is too difficult while the master continues to instruct the students without moving from his original seat. For the young man who seems to be lost in the universe, he realizes why his mentor warned him about this. In the unknown space of self-knowledge, only he and the wisdom of the bronze guy, whose instructions seem to drive a person crazy, remain. In the morning, Sojin wakes up to see that Bronzino's score on his phone. With only 0.06% out of 100. A week later, the doctor admires the incredible speed of his patient's recovery, while Sojin is still standing on his feet. The doctor shares that this is the first time he has seen something like this in his 30 years of experience. The guy just smiles happily and draws his own conclusions. He said that thanks to his Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, his heart had become calm and his regeneration accelerated, even though he had only listened to a little more than 1% of the lecture, and he wondered what would happen when he listened to it in full while the doctor recommended staying in the hospital for another week. Realizing how serious the Transcendent Academy is, he decides why not watch a lecture by another instructor, Kiran, in the lesson of which it is proposed to go through Class A metamorphoses. That seem rather low in rank compared to the unwavering heart. Kiran turns out to be a blond man with a thick beard and sharp narrow gear sticking out to the sides. As you know, he is not a man, but a centaur, a creature with a human torso and the lower body of a horse. He was the teacher of almost every known hero of Greek mythology such as Hercules, Theseus, Achilles, Jason, and others. The reason why? Gives the lecture is to prepare students for the stage from which they can move to the early level of transcendence. While the instructor informs him that this course will cover only superficial combat techniques. The guy lies relaxed on the bed with his eyes closed. The mythical creature informs us about the first step to becoming an actor, which clearly interests social. However, there is no continuation of the phrase because the mentor, silent angrily gritting his teeth, and then he shouts at the student with all his might to get up and leave immediately. This is quite frightening for a guy who, out of fear, even managed to drop his phone and jump up from the place where he had been lying quietly before his shouts could be heard even outside the walls of the hospital building. So loud was he, the stunned guy didn't even realize what was happening and stared blankly at the ceiling. As it turned out, the screaming made him fall out of the hospital bed and he did not move until he received a new notification on his phone. Today a guy has to run 30 kilometers to 1000 squats, 300 push-ups, 300 press-ups and 150 pull-ups. But he decides to cheat and just listen to the lectures until he is discharged from the hospital. However, he was unable to do so because the application notifies him that there is an outstanding task that must be completed. Having concluded that it was a simple notification, the young man decides to try to close the pop-up message. The attempt was unsuccessful. The tortured boy stared at the floor with his head down and his head bowed. However, he decides that 1 week is no substitute for anything, so there is no need to push himself. The very thought of this brings a smile to his face. The guy is going to listen to the bronze guy's lectures first, but sees a sign saying that the pass expires in 83 days, therefore due to laziness. Tears in a short period of time, the boy could be seen running to the sports ground past the surprised looks of pedestrians. Believe it or not, the Transcendental Academy is not an ordinary educational institution, so it is quite logical that not everything is free. The young man stops for a short breather and thinks that if there are 83 days left, then he must have a free pass for 90. Most likely, to improve his level, he needs to enrich his knowledge, but after watching the video, he does not feel any changes. For example, the lecture from the bronze guy that Sojin listened to over and over again for a week did not change his progress, which remained at the same point as before. The young man exhales tiredly, and doubts begin to creep into his mind whether he will even have time to complete the entire course. The time he has left, the student stretches his body, realizing that he hasn't trained for a long time, and concludes that the free pass is a kind of trial period. Up until that point, he hadn't seen any point in training at all because of his job carrying defeated monsters, so he decides to start with push-ups. During the performance, he recalls carrying monsters that weighed about 70 kilograms and did not need additional loads. Although the young man does not have magical powers, he is awakened and confident in his physical form, even if he sweats so much that he is dripping with sweat. After completing the prescribed 300 push-ups, the guy stands up and shakes off the dirt on his hands. Yawning, he compares the workload to years of grueling work and concludes that it wasn't that difficult and decides to continue with the task. However, in the appendix where the item of push-ups is listed, instead of 300, only 81 are listed, which raises questions for the guy, and it occurs to him that perhaps the point is that the execution of the exercise was not perfect. So with trembling hands, he starts doing push-ups again, but in the right way, and the app adds 1 point to his statistics, checking his phone. Sojin confirms his guesses, noticing the difference between the numbers before the exercise and those after the experiment. So, gritting his teeth and ignoring his trembling body, he completes the task to the end, getting the required maximum 300 points. They were followed by 150 pull-ups and then the required 300 presses and 1000 sit-ups. All the exercises are accompanied by the boy's comments within assessment of his own performance. At sunset, the young man completes the last running task completely exhausted, and the app shows the maximum number of possible points. He fell straight to the ground and screamed while passers-by muttered under their breaths about the stranger's bad manners. The very fact that he will have to do this day in and day out brings tears to his eyes, and he does not know where to find the time to listen to lectures. A few days after the first training session, Sojin meets an elderly woman in the hospital lobby who is also a patient. He praised his appearance as if he were getting more and more handsome every day and asks if he is going to go in for sports again. The boy confirms his grandmother's guest and asks about her condition, and while he is actively answering, the man sitting next to her hints that he is being interrupted in his reading. Suddenly, urgent news is announced on TV that a level 4 impaler has been found in the capital city center in the morning. The Monster Transportation Association claims that the creature was hibernating, but they did not know about it, which is why it was able to wake up. Many people could have been injured, but by pure chance, they were lucky. After all, the supernatural creature was awakened nearby and repelled the attack. The rescuer turned out to be a student of Gain Academy named Jung Yoon Yoon, an S-class hunter. The grandmother responded to this report by saying that they had been saved again. She calls the awakened great people and does not hide her admiration for the helpful people. Addressing Sojung, she clarifies whether he is awakened and receives a positive answer, and she assumes that the boy is also a hunter, so he will be shown on TV someday. At this, he is embarrassed. Suddenly, the fat man who had been reading the newspaper rakes it up in his hand and glares at him and his companion. He says that it is very difficult to become a hunter nowadays, and that it is literally one chance in a million. These words surprised the pensioner. Then the fat man turns his attention to the boy and asks him with a condescending tone if he is a student. However, He does not even allow her to answer and continues to harass her, reminding her that Sojin does not even study at the academy and is training in vain. So he advises him to give up the memories of how hard he worked to pay off his debts and save up for a year of study at the academy. These words were meant to break down the reality of his unrealizable dreams, instantly reacting to the insulting expressions in his direction. The young man's eyes are filled with angry rage. His hands clench into fists as the elderly lady reprimands the uninvited interlocutor for his words, and the latter hides behind his desire to help. The boy replies in a steady and restrained tone that it is up to him to decide what to do. This makes the man angry and he starts to reprimand the young man again, but in response, he receives the phrase communicating he does not tolerate objections, let him deal with his own life and do not dare to interfere in someone else's. Unexpectedly, the man stops talking and stares at Sojung in disbelief. And so far a new wave of aggression from the fat man about how the younger generation is rude and does not listen to the older generation is flying back at the guy. He left the scene of the quarrel without stopping. Not intending to listen to this empty talk any longer, his dream came true and he became a student at the academy, and after a week of training, he feels the results so he can become a professional hunter. After studying at a specialized institution, the young man does not stop training and continues to perform daily tasks with enthusiasm. Meanwhile, the huntress who reached her goal with fatigue talks about how tired he is of this work. He fights monsters and meanwhile wonders what the point of the academy is. Professionally swinging her weapon in confrontation with otherworldly beings. The thought that everything has to be paid for and he has no students never leaves her. With all its inherent strength, it fights a fierce battle with its enemies, who easily wins by climbing on the last monster. Defeated, all this seems incredibly boring to her. Meanwhile, the bodies of the enemies lie motionless on the field of their last battle. It was late evening. Outside, an artificial light shone through the windows of the houses, illuminating the apartments. As soon as he gets into the house, he immediately collapses on the soft bed. Meanwhile, the doctor was surprised how he was able to recover so quickly. In just 2 weeks. For the young man himself, the rehabilitation period lasted endlessly. He was so eager to return to his small home as soon as possible. Say. Ocean's expression takes on a thoughtful look and he rests his head on the bed. Water drips from the tap and he thinks about the fact that there is still a year left before the hunter's exam. Right at the entrance to the apartment, a bag lazily thrown by the owner is lying there and the guy is trying to remember how much money he has left in his account. The poor student's apartment doesn't have windows as large and spacious as the others. On the contrary, the window is hidden behind cobweb bars. And the realization that he was left with nothing at all is noticeably upsetting. But the memory that the daily orders have been fulfilled for today is invigorating. Due to his training, he had no time to watch the lectures, so Sojun decides that today he should make up for it. Turning on the lecture on his phone, a satisfied Kirin appears before his eyes, stroking his beard, and he throws in the phrase that the student seems to have finally learned to walk, which sounds more like an appeal to an infant than to a grown man holding a spear in his hand and moving his hooves on the spot. The instructor instructs him that it looks like it's time to take his first steps toward the path of becoming a transcendent. So what Soha needs to start with is this feeling. This is the end of the lecture. The next morning, the young man goes to his old job where he is told by his boss that his injury is not serious and that he must have been stupid to decide to go back because if something like this happens again, he won't get out of it so easily. But despite this feigned harshness, the awakened one notices that the employer still feels guilty, though not strongly enough. Later, in a large gray container used for transportation which was converted into a break room for the staff, a young man sits on a bench in a typical thinker's pose and comes to the conclusion that he has no idea how to combine work. Study, after all, without completing daily tasks, listening to new lectures is impossible. So he decides to at least listen to the old ones and recalls what Kirin said in the last video. While another worker enters the room from the street, turning on a video lesson about the 5 basic feelings, he doesn't notice a colleague watching him. The man stands behind the young man until he realizes that he is no longer alone in the room. Meanwhile, the instructor continues his presentation and explains how the whole process of perception works and promises to teach how to speed it up. However, first we need to understand that in addition to the 5 basic feelings, there is another feeling that is hidden in everyone. The boy sits and listens intently to Kirin's words without taking his eyes off the screen. And now the intrigue is revealed and intuition is revealed by an unknown force. The man is about to shake the young man's hand in greeting, but he dodges it unexpectedly. The old friend's face blurs into a grimace of surprise when the boy himself is not much different from him because he did not expect this from himself. The older man asks how he did it, but Sojin is not allowed to answer. By his boss, who shouts that if they came to work, they should not sit around while performing his regular duties. A recent interlocutor asks if the younger man will be able to handle a load of 200 kilograms, but the young man calms him down and hurries him to put the monsters in a carrier on his back without much effort. The student calmly carries the loaded bodies while his colleagues. They are after him in disbelief of what they see with their own eyes, so the older man decides that everything is really fine with the boy. Meanwhile, the break is called. The workers complain that the longer they work, the harder it gets. And so Chung walks by, noting that he feels overwhelmed by the strength. In order not to waste time, he decides to complete his daily tasks because he won't have time after work. And starts squatting with the load, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He takes out his phone to check if he's doing everything right. However, what he sees is shocking and he cannot believe his eyes. After all, just by one sit-up according to the app, he scored as many as 3 points. This happened because the extra weight increased the efficiency of the exercise. While Sojung is spending time thinking. He is called to rest, but he lets all the words that were addressed to him slide by because he has come up with a brilliant idea. Why spend time on training when you can do it while working? So, without missing an opportunity, he decides to help his senior colleague. He also does push-ups in parallel to count the result in the app because the more weight, the fewer performances are required. However, playing at home on a soft mattress, enthusiasm disappears as if it had never happened, and fatigue takes its place. Of course, combining work and studies turned out to be very effective but difficult. The look on my uncle's face alone was worth it. Getting out of bed, the boy takes out his phone to check his grades and sees the highest marks he could get. Therefore, he praises himself for the time he has saved. When he sees a notification about a completed daily task by 10 o'clock in the evening, Sojin has managed to listen to new lectures by both Kirin and Bronzino aka Bronzer Guy and does not know what else to do to keep from wasting time. Therefore, he hesitates between watching the video in a new round, even though his progress will not be counted, and signing up for another additional course in one of the options. Professor Seongyu suggests that he becomes so strong that he can lift mountains with his own hands. The course seems good and it's free, and after completing it, the guy will get a spear that moves mountains, so he confirms the registration. In the very first seconds of the famous general's lecture, he begins to mock the listener, calling him a failure who does not know the basics. At the instructor's words, Sojin tenses up. Invisibly lowers his shoulders, not expecting such a start, but the man condescendingly agrees to teach anyone who wants to. But all fools can go away, and the strange sage whom he called a monkey should not be listened to. He had to learn how to swing the spear and feel it in every cell of his body. So the guy was given another task adapted to his level. The fact that the great king said only a few sentences in the lecture ended up upsetting the boy. He whimpered in frustration because the task was also strange, just swinging a spear in order to master it. The next morning, a young lady came to the production facility to check on safety after a recent incident with a monster in the city center. It was the awakened one who eliminated the creature. Her name is Park Seo-young and she is a B-class hunter and while the head of the company gladly agreed to the audit. Other employees squinted unkindly at their superiors while they were wondering who this girl was and how their employer was almost kneeling before her. Sojin was doing his job properly, but the workers' guesses that this stranger might be the granddaughter of the Star Sword made him distracted. After all, this is the same famous Park Min-shul in the present tense. A powerful gray-bearded, handsome man, 100 years ago. He was one of the awakened ones who gained their power when the gates to the other world opened. Back then, nobody knew anything about them, and the monsters roamed the streets uncontrollably and attacked people. And in one such case, when the creature was about to attack a woman with a child, I had no confidence that humanity would survive at all. He drew his star Lord and repelled the monster's attack, thus saving 2 defenseless people. A little boy clinging to his mother with all his might watched in disbelief as an unknown man fought a fierce battle. Lightning bolts circled around the savior and reflected off his weapon. At that time, Park Mitchell was one of the few awakened ones, one of those who did not allow humanity to disappear forever. He is a true hero. A lot of time has passed since then and the guy has become an old man, but the man can still compete with any hunter. As Sojin finalizes the story, he nods to himself, clearly satisfied with his knowledge. He continues to do squats because he doesn't care about the girl. Noticing the strange employee Seo-young asks the manager what's wrong with the young man, and the man tells her to ignore him, concluding that the stranger, not a friend of her head, he straightens her hair and walks past. An uncle who works with a student at an enterprise informs the boss that he will leave the monsters' bodies in this place. The latter, without much hesitation, agrees to do the job. The boy and the older man stay to work with the remains of the creatures. The younger man even has time to continue training. The body of the monster lies motionless in the place where it was left. It is huge, with large sharp caviar and horns and snow-white fur. Meanwhile, Seo Jun is trying to prove to his uncle that there is a point to training, even though his words are not credible. And while the awakened one goes after the other monsters to gather them in one place, the man is left alone. However, there is an unpleasant feeling that something is about to happen. The guy stops tensely and turns to look at the place where the monster was. However, right before his eyes, he soars into the sky over her senior colleague, which is quite frightening. The creature's eyes glow bright yellow, and its mouth is open just enough to make it look even creepier than it was before. The young man, frightened and shocked, calls out to the man who was right under the creature shortly before an unfortunate incident occurred elsewhere. Say. Oh-hun breathes a sigh of relief. Finally, he managed to escape from the head of the company, who had already had enough of her trying to suck up to him. He stood leaning on a column inside the building and caught the sidelong glances of the workers. They did not hesitate to discuss the fact that the girl was the granddaughter of the very star sword near her. We thought they were completely inaudible. They also talked about what class the hero's relative belonged to. As soon as you found out that the young woman belonged to the awakened B class, you were immediately surprised, and the young lady's eyes showed sadness because of the labels, because since childhood, her grandfather had taught her to be a hunter. However, the bar, he said, was too high to reach, and despite the efforts he has made to heal the wounds on her arms all her life, he is still compared to a great hero, so no matter how much Ko Young wanted to become a teacher, her grandfather insisted that he follow in his footsteps. Despite his granddaughter's pleas, the old man did not even want to hear about the teenager's YHs, which prevented him from living a normal life. However, they came to a compromise, and the young woman was able to establish a hunter academy. But everyone who came thought that they would be taught by a star sword, and so when they heard a rejection of their assumptions, they concluded that they had been deceived and were disappointed. The young woman was surprised to hear such words from the new students. However, after the news that some girl was going to teach them, they left because they lost interest. These actions only aroused anger, which I had to restrain. Despite my desire, the very fact that everyone who wanted to enter the academy came here only to be a hunter hero and not for knowledge was devastating, and even those brave souls who remained after the disappointing words eventually dropped out because of his grandfather's threats. That's why no one knows anything about the institution now. Just to say, Oh-yoon was thinking about how good it would be if she had at least one worthy student. A ruckus broke out. For some reason, everyone was running away from the company and urging others not to hesitate and join them. The cause for all this ruckus was because of a monster that turned out to be alive. The workers' words truly shocked the huntress. Meanwhile, at the scene, among the remains of other monsters, an angry otherworldly creature stood in full combat readiness over the exhausted man. Recognizing the creature as a manticore, Sojin could not understand how it could come back to life unless it had been defeated. The older man begged the young man to get out, while the lion-like monster with a scorpion tail came closer and closer to him. Despite his friend's request to run away and save himself, the young man froze in place. He realized that something terrible was about to happen. The young man's pupils narrowed, and his eyes widened, and panic and fear for his uncle, whom he had known for a long time. After all, the manticore belongs to the 4th level of monsters, which is difficult for a professional to deal with, let alone ordinary people. Bai involuntarily recalled the girl who was at the plant in the morning and passed by. She must be a huntress and must be around. However, the thought that the girl will not be in time prompts him to look for something to protect his uncle with. He simply has to act now because the monster is not going to leave so easily when a defenseless person is lying in front of it. The monster licks its sharp teeth with its long tongue in anticipation of a successful hunt, and the guy notices this and starts shaking because the thought of acting directly does not seem easy at all. Meanwhile, the beast prepares to attack and opens its mouth wide. So without further delay, the young man grabs a metal stick that was nearby. He throws off his shoulders and runs straight at his opponent. He wrapped his arms around the weapon with both hands and swung with all his might and screamed. He makes a lunge, driving the monster away from his friend, who is floating in the air again. When the man calls Sojin, the boy asks him to run away as fast as he can, standing as a living wall between the man and the powerful creature. But his colleague doesn't understand how to leave the younger one behind, but he says that in this case, the monster will eat them both. When the boy is standing one-on-one with a super strong opponent, his hands around the stick are squeezed even more tightly and he takes a fighting stance. His main goal is not even to win, but to hold out until help comes to him. Fear envelops his body and the space around him with a thick crimson fog, and the guy just begs him to keep his temper, not to hesitate and not to stand still. Suddenly the darkness disappears and the words of the bronze guy come to mind. Each teaching makes him remember the feeling of silence and calm, as if all emotions were a complete calm, quiet water that is made to move by the steps of the boy. When he returns to reality, the monster is in the same place as before. The voice of a mentor in his head says that he needs to think about the task ahead and where he is moving and put emotions aside. At this point, the manticore pushes off the ground with its hind legs to jump on the boy, leaving traces behind. With lightning speed, it targets a person who doesn't even think about running away and stands still. His heart, which had recently been pounding with fear, finally finds peace. And so Jung moves to meet the creature, each step of which is so powerful that it breaks the ground to form pits when the two opponents. As close as possible to each other, the monster swings out to strike with its clawed paw. Here he also recalled the words of Chiron, who said not to think, but to move because it may be too late, and to trust your instincts. At the last moment the young man manages to dodge the beast's attack, which was coming right at his neck, and he does a backflip, increasing the distance with a huge angry creature. It doesn't hesitate. Swings its tail, which looks like a scorpion sting. However, such actions do not frighten the young man, whose face expresses absolutely nothing. He decides to use a stick to make the jump, and while the manticore jumps to the place where its prey was just now, the awakened young man is already in the air. Not understanding where the enemy has gone, the beast starts to wave his face to the sides in an attempt to find him, so the young man concludes that the creature is unable to see him and that this is a blind spot. He does not understand what he should do now. Maybe it's time to launch an attack. However, right at the moment of doubt he begins to recall the advice of Professor Seong-yoon, in which he said that it is not enough to be strong to move mountains, you also need to have courage and aspiration, so you have to believe that the guy can do it. And don't even dare to doubt himself. Sojin's hands shift on the stick as if he were holding a spear, and he swings it. Realizing that the young man will be able to overcome the fierce enemy, his eyes widen in disbelief. The student considers it his duty to emerge victorious from this battle, so he targets the manticore that has not found him. When the distance is shortened, the animal still manages to find its target with its paws. The monster has its mouth opens wide again, revealing rows of sharp teeth, and it growls loudly. Meanwhile, the metal pipe the guy uses as a weapon is illuminated by lightning, and he divides the huge body of the creature exactly in half with one movement. A loud sound spreads around from the force of the blow used by the young man against the creature. People who were close to the epicenter of the events, including the B-rank hunter Seo Young, wonder what is happening and what kind of explosion it was. The dirt and dust kicked up by the impact swirl around the young monster hunter, however, through which he notices a work uniform and a male figure standing with a metal pipe in his hand. The wind blows a cloud of dirt and a picture of a young boy and the manticore body divided into two parts appears before everyone. The student seems to still be in prostration, and stares blankly into the void. A moment later, however, his face takes on a surprised expression. A little embarrassed under the scrutiny. He scratches the back of his head, not believing that he has succeeded in realizing the defense. Meanwhile, in the Academy's app, all lectures received additional progress percentages. The young huntress was shocked by the situation that happened right before her eyes. Some young worker who doesn't even study at the Academy with a metal pipe instead of a normal weapon was able to survive the battle against the monster. Suddenly the guy's expression turns from emotionless to excited and he runs past the girl, not even paying her any attention. Instead of worrying about his own condition, the boy asks his senior colleague if he is okay and checks for injuries, and when the man asks how he managed to pull it off, Sojin reminds him of his training sessions. The manager spins around the girl. All the workers happily rake the young man into their arms, praising him, while he reminds them that his uncle should visit the hospital. The head of the company's words do not go down well with Seo Young, who does not take her eyes off the new hero and realizes that she has found a worthy student. By order of the boss, no one is to spread information about what happened at work today, and everyone goes home saying goodbye. On the way home, the young man takes his phone out of his pocket to check today's statistics in the app and sees that his progress in the lectures has increased significantly, and he concludes that it's all because he defeated the manticore. Because it's much better to do one hard task once than to hear 1,000 lectures. Therefore, practice is the best way to improve with a couple of lectures, but the problem is that without a hunter's license, no one will let him into the dungeon. So now the question arises of saving money for training. Suddenly a woman's voice calls out to him and he turns around to see a stranger asking for a few words. However, in the female he recognizes the granddaughter of the infamous Star Sword. Not understanding what she wants from him at all, he agrees to talk and the huntress decides to get right down to the business. Without hesitation, the girl suggests that the boy meet her grandfather, who is known to everyone as the Star Sword. However, the girl's proposal did not impress Sojin, so he declares without any emotion that he is not interested. At first, the brunette says that she had no doubt that he would want to, but when she hears his answer, she is surprised because the young man simply walks away, and while she asks him to wait and not leave, he just walks home, thinking that he can finally listen to the lectures there. In her entire life, Seo Young has never had to deal with such a situation before, so her face takes on a shocked look because she doesn't know what to do. The guy refuses to enroll because there are no students there. In fact, this institution is considered an academy only on paper. The young woman doesn't even know what to think because this worker is as strange as the exercises he performs. But his victory over the manticore was incredible. The young lady continues to persuade the guy to study under her because she has everything he needs except for teachers, but she is ready to teach him. However, she is again rejected by her interlocutor, who explains that he does not need any teachers, and this certainly makes the young lady very angry. So she has to go to extreme lengths and asks if he would agree if she persuaded her grandfather to take him as a student. But even this offer did not interest him. Although all hunters dream of learning from the Star Sword, and a fool is ready to give up such an opportunity. The girl reminds him that there is a written part of the exam and asks how he is going to pass it, but he replies that he will manage somehow. So, clutching at the last straw, she asks about the dungeons, because without the academy he is not allowed in them and he is wasting his time. The guy calmly asks what is the point of attending an academy that will not give him a license, but the matter is resolved with a promise to go to the dungeon. After receiving the information, the guy stops in his tracks and thinks about it. Noticing the Sojin's doubts, Seo Young decides that he can't back down, and if he doesn't need teachers, she's ready to give him a place to train. In addition, she claims that she will not take a penny for tuition. He turns to the girl and clarifies that he just has to enter the academy and asks what she needs from him. In response, he was told that until he became a hunter, he would represent the academy at competitions and tell them that he was studying there. He thinks this is extremely beneficial because this way he will be able to solve all his problems at once and nothing is required of him. However, when asked why she chose him, the lady replies that she simply saw his potential. She looks at the guy hopefully, hoping that he will accept her proposal, and he smiles back and thinks that it's really not a bad deal because each of them benefits from this transaction. So he stretches out his hand to meet me, and introduces himself as Sojin. The young lady joins their palms in a handshake with a smile on her face and shares that her name is Park Seo Young. The next day, the phone he was holding in his hand vibrated to alert him to an incoming call. Mr. Mancho called and asked what the boy had done yesterday because their manager had been fired. He involuntarily recalled yesterday's conversation with the girl in which he asked him to tell his company that he would not cooperate with them because of his boss, but the guy didn't admit to this dialogue, and a colleague at work said that the main thing was that the person was no longer at the company. Continuing the conversation on the phone, he met Seo Young at the Hunters Academy called Dream. She held out her hand with Sojin's temporary license to give it to him. The girl organized everything so quickly that the date on which the permission to enter the dungeon is valid is considered was in fact dated yesterday. The card indicated the serial number of the class to which the boy belongs, his name, the ID, and the academy that issued the document. The new card has greatly improved the guy's mood because it is the first step towards his dream. And this is just the beginning. The young man had asked her to permit him to go on raids, but there was no need because the girl has already prepared a weapon that could suit the guy, and after he makes a choice they will go to a dungeon. Pleased with herself, Seo Yoon smiled at the guy and told him that she had already signed the contract. As they approached the dungeon, its entrance was covered with adhesive tape, warning them to be careful. In another dimension, they met a mutant who looked like a huge rat who got hit in the face with a stick during a fight. Investigating the raids, Sojin recalled that the girl had promised not to interfere, so he did not understand why she followed him. She replied that he should consider that he was having an individual lesson and that only the most capable students had such an opportunity. Since this is the first time the guy is in the dungeon, it now acts as a practice. And although only cobblers live here, he should not lose his guard. The young man said that fortunately, he could easily pierce their magical armor just as he had done in the battle with the manticore, and continued on his way. He thinks that attacks that are not soaked in mana should simply bounce off the creature's defenses. Suddenly another creature that looked like the previous one that Sojin had already fought popped out of nowhere, but the girl had warned him about it. The monster flies past him thanks to his dodging, and the boy freezes in place and takes a swing as he continues to fight. He does not understand why his attacks are so effective and stabs the creature with his spear. In addition, the Transcendence Academy app notifies him that his progress is increasing after fights, which pleases him a lot. Watching from the outside, the girl froze in shock as she took her sword out of its sheath. The student continued to say that he can make good money in dungeons and that he should speed up, and as he sent one monster after another monster to the next world, he concluded that it resembled a video game in which he could farm experience. From the very beginning, she realized that something was wrong with the guy, but what he was doing now scared her. Ever since they returned from the dungeon, he has been looking at the screen of the turned-off phone, wondering if she sees anything. Worst of all, the strangeness doesn't end there, and the young man also starts talking to the gadget. In addition, the newcomer who found himself in the dungeon for the first time, chopped Cobalt like a trained professional on their first outing. He dragged the monsters with him, and he forced her to do it because they were paying for it. The girl started wondering how she can continue to hide the fact that she has a student from her grandfather. Meanwhile, the guy is shouting that it's midnight and he hasn't listened to the lecture, which makes him look like a beast-slashing, nerdy Cinderella. The young man's still glowing with happiness, and the air around him is sparkling. And all because he made 9.5 million in one day. Of course, he had to carry and dismantle the carcasses of monsters himself, and it was not easy, but all his efforts paid off. The only problem is that all this takes too much time and effort, and because of this, he does not have time to listen to the lectures standing on a pedestrian crossing. He thinks about asking his uncle Manchul to work with him, and the money he earned instead of saving it up again would be better spent on something useful. So he came up with the idea that he needed to write to his friend about the time he would have while crossing the road clearing the dungeons. He earns money and improves his progress in the lectures, but everything is much slower than he expected, remembering the strange sage. One will come, he wonders, if there is a quick way to become stronger. Suddenly he stands in the middle of the road and gets an incredible idea. After all, how could he not remember that he had once seen a part of the lecture and had not had a penny for it before, but now he could afford it. The lectures of this teacher are called the Basics of Fighting with the Staff and Spear, meant to serve the purpose of dispelling delight and piercing, which makes the young man's face light up with joy. However, everything comes crashing down when he sees that the fee to get a video from the master costs 27 billion won. So at first he freezes in disbelief, but then he is shocked and shouts the amount of money he has to pay to the whole street. He squats down, knowing full well that even an SS-tier class hunter cannot earn that much, and people passing by gossip and look surprised. So the guy decides that someday later he will get this master class. Now he doesn't have time for it. Anyway, he concludes that since he has no money for lectures, maybe he has a chance to buy some equipment and people passing by think he's crazy. In the application he finds a transcendental store in which all the weapons are made by students studying at the academy, and sees something that cannot but impress as it gleams on its stand. Now, all these things are known for being used by the hero of myths and legends, and even if they are all replicas, they are legendary weapons. He can't believe that all this is called training equipment, because even he, as a person who doesn't understand it, thinks it's something incredible. The young man sits in a crouch and gets acquainted with general information about the masterpieces produced by other transcendents. And who would have thought that it would be so easy to get a legendary weapon? So he begins to choose what he might need from the list. The first in line is a mystery spear used by an elite gladiator, the individual value of which is calculated by the program. The next day, when Seo Young arrives at the academy, she notices a guy training like crazy, so the girl asks what happened while the student ventures to count his exercises, and he recalls that he guessed that the spear would be expensive, but he did not expect to see the cost of 100 million WAN. For such a price, he won't even be able to resell it because only students of the academy have the right to use the items created by their predecessors. Even 100 million WAN is a total utter rip-off for him, so he has no idea how he can save up 27 billion for the strange sage's lecture. Meanwhile, the young huntress asks if the boy has a free minute and starts talking about the academy tournament. The young man admits that he has heard about it but does not know the details, and the girl says that each academy wants to prove that it is better than the others at these meetings. She then clarifies, like the teacher she is supposed to be, that this competition is to assess the level of the academy. The teacher hands him a few sheets of paper to read. Such competitions are quite versatile, and now their academy is at the 4th level, and if the boy proves himself, he will move to another. After all, the higher the level, the better the institution is considered to be and the more support it will receive from the state. That's why everyone sends only the best students to this competition. The guy guesses that she is explaining all this to him for a reason, and the girl confirms his guests. After all, she wants him to go represent the Dream Academy. Meanwhile, the young man wonders whether participation in the competition will affect the progress of his lectures. Because if he thinks about it, the tournament is also in a sense of practice. So he agrees to the offer. The young woman is surprised, but he explains that they had agreed on such conditions from the very beginning, trying to find out the details of the tournament. The girl shares that everything is secret before the competition starts, but the winner is the one who gets the most points. The guy thought about how he didn't know how to fight people. Because before that, his fights were always limited to kobolds and manticores, so the guy goes to great lengths to say that if he decided to participate, he needs to do his best and that he needs to train. With a hint, he turns his gaze to Seo Young, whose face stretches in surprise as Sojin offers her to become his sparring partner. Therefore, when she takes up arms, she thinks about what she is doing now and agreed to do it only because she was taken for a ride. The student sees these lessons as a great opportunity because the woman belongs to the B class of hunters and was taught by the Star Sword itself as his granddaughter. However, he is only a beginner and it is not for him to judge real hunters. The girl, Seo Yoon, stands with a sword in her hands while the young man teases her that he has long wanted to know what she is capable of. He then asks her to clarify their rank difference, to which he looks at her as a challenge. He asked her to give him a head start in battle by taking a fighting stance, to which the huntress agrees and suggests that he started as soon as he is ready. The young man begins to attack, saying that he will not refuse such an offer. Meanwhile, the girl stands there unmoved, so she lends a hand to repel an attack and agrees with him. The lady's gaze meets the tip of the spear pointed at her by her opponent. The girl, however, was able to dodge without making any extra effort. Although the guy is moving fast enough, his movements remain clumsy. Moreover, they are also too easy to read, which makes it easy to fight against them. Recalling the battlefield in the dungeon, she concludes that she must have overestimated her student, and her face takes on a sad expression. Dodging his every attack, she doesn't understand just how she can be sure that he will be able to withstand a sparring match with her. So she decides to end it and strike back with her sword. Suddenly something happens that she clearly did not expect to see, and her eyes widened in disbelief. And all because Sojin was able to block her attack. So now they are standing opposite each other and the girl is watching the student's actions. He tries his best not to let go of the weapon. Although it is difficult for him, the fact is that the huntress used an unusual attack using mana. Usually in such cases, the weapon fell out of the opponent's hands, yet this guy managed to counterattack. The shockwave pushes the guy a few meters away from the place where they clashed with weapons. After that, the opponents look at each other from different sides of the room, noticing that the girl is surprised by this turn of events. A predatory smile appears on the guy's face, like he is Hisoka from Hunter x Hunter. It turns out that he somehow split his lip during the fight, so he decides that it's time to fight seriously. Suddenly she notices that the student's movements have changed and his attacks have become clearer and faster. They don't even compare to what they were before. The young man does not stop and delivers blow after blow. However, he is absorbed in his thoughts and hears Kyra's voice telling him to start with the obvious attacks and then dilute them with distractions and feints, so the young man listens to the advice and does as he is told. You shouldn't expect your opponent to stand still like a pillar. And the proof of this is the huntress response, who blocks all attacks. It is not surprising that obvious attacks are followed by obvious blocks. The awakened one twists his spear, throwing it back and strikes again. The voice in his head keeps telling him to repeat this until the enemy opens up for a real attack. The huntress almost falls to the floor when Sojin leaps from above for the final blow. He needs to put all the strength he has into it, so he takes a swing. The girl's eyes reflect his combat readiness, and she realizes that it is really dangerous. The pillar of light is so destructive that the floor in the area of its action is torn apart. The teacher stands there in shock, pulling her sword aside and not realizing what just happened. Meanwhile, the guy is lying in the broken wall where he was pushed by Seo Yoon's counterattack. She begins to reproach herself for hitting him with all her might without even thinking, and runs to the defeated guy. He gets up from the floor and summarizes that he has lost the fight. Seo Yoon, on the other hand, clearly did not expect that the guy hoped he could defeat her. Even though he realized that he was fighting a B-class hunter, and the student comes to the conclusion that fighting a man and a monster are completely different things, so he will need to adapt to his opponent. However, he does not get discouraged and decides that everything is still ahead. Meanwhile, he receives a notification on his phone. The Transcendent Academy app informs him that his progress has increased, so he decides that he needs to develop in different directions. The suggestion of additional training after the guy has just received combat injuries surprises the huntress, so she promises that she will study with him every day and help him complete the necessary tasks, and she will also give him the prize money. The young man did not even expect to receive a cash prize for this tournament. The teacher pauses, trying to remember how much money is given for winning the competition, and when he finds out that the amount reaches $100,000 he already starts to imagine how he can spend it on that mysterious spear that was out of his budget. So the student asks when the competition between the academies will take place. When he heard that he had 2 weeks left, his eyes lit up with a sparky fire when he shouts that he needs sandbags or it won't work as well. The woman doesn't understand what he's talking about, so without hesitation he picks up a huge piece of stone which shocks the girl. To prevent anything bad from happening, she points out that the sandbags are in the corner so he can use them. On the day of the tournament, a stranger wearing glasses walks into the establishment past people discussing this year's competition. He can't contain his joy at finally reaching this place. However, he did not expect such a crowd, but he concludes that if there is something to see, there will be viewers, so he continues to think out loud about why so many people and passers-by think he is a weird spectacle to behold. The youth then remembers that he is in a hurry and therefore asks the man at the entrance where the waiting room is. Will this diamond in the rough, Sojin, realize his full potential during this tournament competition? Or will he encounter a foe like never before and meet a rival? Stay tuned if you want to know what happens next in part 2. Like, share and subscribe if you want to know how this manhwa recap titled, Enrolling in the Transcendent Academy will unfold. For now, stay blessed y'all, and remember Jesus loves you and died for your sins, so be kind and patient to one another.